Hello friends, it's Shari, and today I'm making this fun snowy scene shaker card. So to start with, I'm going to create my night sky that's going to be the background. I'm using some distress watercolor cardstock. This is cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so it will fit perfectly on my card base. And I'm going to be using a lot of different colors of blue distress ink to build up this background and get this really fun inky look. Starting off, I'm using some faded jeans, and I added some clean water all over my paper so it's nice and wet. And then I've added some water to that faded jeans, which I just smushed onto my craft sheet there. I'm picking it up with a paintbrush and just doing a coat of this all over this background. I'm not too terribly concerned about going all the way to the edges. That will get covered up by a die cut frame. So I'm going to pick up some of that color with the paper to kind of smear it around. Then I'm going to dry it. So I'm going to be drying it between each of these layers. That really helps get some nice droplets and some nice texture, and it keeps those blues from just blending together into one big blue blob. So I'm picking up some of those droplets again, and I'll dry it a little bit more. And I'm just going to use up all that ink that I have there. So you can see these are a little more concentrated in the center there. And you start to see how you get that texture by picking up those droplets. So next I'm going in with Blueprint Sketch, which is darker. And you can see I've put this all over the center, adding a whole lot of water so I get all those blobs of color. And then I'm going to start picking it up with my paper. This one was a little bit too blobby, so I sprayed it with my just water in a spray bottle to give it a little more water in there so it's not quite so concentrated. And then I'll just dry between the layers. So you can see this gives it a nice darker blue, but I still have some of those lighter blue areas down in the center. For this, I'm trying to make it darker towards the top and lighter towards the bottom-ish a little bit to kind of give like there's light at the horizon line. So now I've got that blueprint sketch on there looking the way I want it. Now I'm going in with some prize ribbon, which is even darker, and I'm doing the same technique with this one. You're going to see that this really adds a lot of darkness and color to it. For this one, I'm trying to keep that color kind of towards the top. I'm going to blend it out with that paintbrush a little bit so it's a little more solid. Kind of like if you ink blended it from the top down, which I'm going to do as well. And then I was just using my paper towel to kind of pick up some of those really thick blobs of water so they're not too terribly concentrated and don't take too long to dry. But you can see how I'm getting that texture, and I've kind of framed the top of this panel with that darker color. So once that's dry, I'm going to pick up some more, get some more concentrated and some more texture with those droplets. This is just a really fun thing to do. You could sit around and make all kinds of backgrounds and then make cards out of them later if you wanted. The key to this building up the color to me is to dry it in between. So now I'm using my blending tool. We're going in with Chip Sapphire, even darker. And we're going to bring in that dark color in the top and the corners. So you can see this is what I'm going to cover it up with. So that's why I'm checking to make sure I've brought that color down far enough to get the look that I want. I'm going back in with Faded Jeans, which if you'll remember was that first light color. And I'm just kind of going over that harsh edge between that dark and that lighter to just soften it up just a bit. Doing the same with Blueprint Sketch just to kind of fill it in a little bit so we don't have quite such a harsh edge. I still want it to look like it's a blended sky. And then finally, to really darken it up, I'm using some black soot. So this is really going to get those nice dark edges. And then this is just that Chip Sapphire again, just to kind of blend out the black so it kind of all goes together nicely. I really like the way that looks with the lighter at the horizon line and the darker at the top. Now this is just clean water. I've just put some droplets and I'm going to pick it up with a paper towel so I get some lighter spots. And then this is actually some chipped sapphire oxide, so this is darker. And I was adding this to add even more texture with some dark spots. I was actually kind of dripping more water than I was paint at this point, or ink. So I dabbed that off and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to make sure I have more ink on my brush this time. I just didn't have quite enough water and there was a lot of clear water on my brush. So this will give some dark spots to the sky as well. Pick up some of those bigger ones and dry that with my heat tool. So now I want to add that snowy look. So I'm using some white watercolor. Now this is not going to be quite as opaque as maybe paint would, so I'm actually going to use paint too. So this will give me kind of different variations of white snowy spots in my sky. So I'm going to use some white distress paint to add some darker is not the right word, some more opaque white spots, snow to the sky, because distress paint can be used with water. So I've just added some water to make it thinner, and I'm flicking it off the blocks so that I get smaller dots. Now I did get a nice blob there, but that was easy to kind of wipe away with my paper towel. So now you can see I've got lots of texture in this nighttime snowy sky that I'm going to use for my background. Now to work on the front part of the card, or the foreground, I'm using the forest backdrop with some light brown wood grain cardstock to cut a nice frame. You can see this is a lot lighter, so I want to darken that up. I want this kind of nighttime look to all these pieces that I'm adding. So I'm using some vintage photo distress ink to darken up the edges, and it really makes that wood grain stand out just a bit more. Also that stitching detail around the side. But I like the look of this darkness on the outside edges, and it goes a little bit lighter towards the inside. So I'm just working my way around with that vintage photo to kind of darken up all those places. I'm not concerned about the trees because I'm going to cover those up with some green die cut trees. And you can see this matches that nighttime sky much better once I've got that vintage photo ink on there. So I do have one stamped image in this card. It is with the Frosty Friends stamp set, which is an oldie but goodie. This is one of my more well-loved stamp sets, as you can see. And I'm using the small snowman, the scarf, and some earmuffs for him. And I'm just going to do some simple coloring. I'm going to give him some red accessories. So I'm starting with my darker color at the bottom of the earmuffs, and then I'll blend it out with the lighter one. And I'm going to use those same reds for the scarf. Starting with the dark at the edges and kind of pulling in, and also at the knot of the scarf. And then I'll just pull that out with the lighter color. And I actually felt like on the scarf it needed just a bit more contrast, so I grabbed an even darker red and kind of went back in to where those shadowy places are and added a little bit of that R29. Now for my snowman, just a simple orange carrot nose, and then I'm going to go in with some cool grays and trace around him. I don't want him too bright because again, this is a nighttime scene, and actually I am going to, you'll see I'll end up darkening him up just a little bit with some distress ink towards the end. But now I'm going in with the C00 and blending out that C1. So he's white in the center with some cool gray around the edges. And to kind of get rid of that line a little bit more and make it a little softer, I'm just using my colorless blender. So I'll go ahead and assemble my little snowman, put his earmuffs on and his scarf. And for the bottom of the scarf, I wanted it to kind of pop up a little bit, so what I did was I actually stuck a thin foam square underneath it so that it's kind of flowing in the wind and popped up away from the snowman just a little bit. Now for the trees, so this is the tree that comes in that forest backdrop die set. I've cut 2 large trees from Noble Fir cardstock and 1 small tree. I don't need 2 because one's going to get covered up by my snowman. And I'm just darkening up this on the edges with some Rustic Wilderness ink. So these 2 are going to be on the left side, so I've inked the right side of the tree, and then this one's going to be on the right side, so I'm going to ink the left side of the tree. Now that my trees are all nice and inky, I can go ahead and add them to that wood grain frame. So I'm just using some liquid glue to add those directly to that textured cardstock. So I've got that one on the left, I've got the one on the right. And then what I like to do with the little one that's going to overlap is add a little sliver of cardstock behind the part that doesn't have the tree in the background. And then that way this lays nice and flat on top of that tree beside it and then the background. I have a little piece of pixie dust cardstock that I'm cutting with the Simple Stitch Hillside, and this is going to be my snowy ground at the bottom of my scene where my nighttime sky is. So I'll just add a little bit of liquid glue to the bottom and the sides of this and place this right at the bottom of my frame. Just a little hint of the snowy hill. Now I wanted a silhouette of a house on my little snowy hill in the night, so I'm using the little town border cut from some black licorice cardstock, and I'm just going to trim off one of these little houses. I've got some extra cardstock at the bottom of that border die, so I can just put this house right on the horizon line. I'm also going to add some birch trees in the foreground, so I've cut these from some ground coffee cardstock, and I'm just going to add them. I like the look of it coming out of the frame at the top and then being tucked behind the trees at the bottom. I just think that's a really fun look for these trees. And once I get it placed where I want it, I'll just trim off the excess that's sticking out at the top. I also like that there are 3 sizes of these trees so that I can put the 2 skinnier ones on the right and still get a nice balanced look, but not a symmetrical look. It looks much more natural, like we're in the forest looking out towards the sky. So once I get those where I want them, I'll just trim the tops of those as well. Now that my starry sky or snowy sky is all nice and dry, I'm just going to add that to a card base so that I'm ready to assemble my card when I get to that point. And then since I'm making a shaker card, I have a piece of acetate that is cut just slightly smaller than this background panel or backdrop panel. I've put some double-sided tape all over all 4 sides. You can see I've got some on the backs of those trees, around that circle, and I'm just going to layer this acetate on the back. So now that whole shaker front has that acetate filling that window opening. Now I did feel like my snowman was a little too bright for a nighttime scene, so I'm just going to darken him up a little bit with some Hickory Smoke Distress ink. And it's nice to kind of do this with him all put together because he gets evenly distressed everywhere. Now I did want to add some little yellow in the window and the door of my house. So instead of getting out some yellow cardstock, I just colored some with a Copic marker, cut that same little town die, and then I'm just popping those little pieces in there. Now that there's acetate behind it, I have something I can stick it to. And I just used some little glue dots for that. And then for the sentiment, I'm using the Winter Wavy Sayings and a wavy banner cut from some chili pepper cardstock. And I'm just going to white emboss the sentiment Happy Holidays in some white embossing powder. So I've just put that in my MISTI just so things didn't move around. And I used some clear embossing ink and then some white embossing powder. And I'm just heating that up with my heat tool till it's all nice and melted and you get that really lovely bright white sentiment on that dark red banner. So to adhere this, I'm just going to add some glue dots. I've got 3 glue dots on the back of this. I think that a glue dot or a double-sided tape works a lot better when you have acetate that you're sticking things to. And since this banner is going to cross over onto that acetate, I wanted to use those glue dots. So now to create the shaker part of my card. Now this card would be really cute just with that inky background without making it a shaker. I just think that background's really nice and I love that night sky. But to make my shaker, I've doubled up my foam tape. So I folded it on top of itself so that I have a double thickness. And then I cut it really thin so that it can hide behind the edges of this die cut forest backdrop frame. And then I'm just going to go around all the edges. I've curved it around the top of that curved frame. That will keep all my shaker pieces kind of in the window and they're not going to go up into those corners. And so I have a really big shaker compartment. So I'm going to fill it with a lot of sequins and a lot of stuff. So I've just got some sequin mixes here from Lucy's Little Things. This one had some snowflakes and some white and clear sequins. This one has some blue sequins that really match my sky really well. And it also has some snowflakes too. And there are these little tiny, which is really hard to see, little silver, I guess, glitter sticks. They're long and thin. So I was trying to scoop some of those out because all the little pieces fall to the bottom of my containers. I'm also going to add some chunky glitter, which actually ended up kind of sticking because of static to the back of the acetate, but it gives it a really cool look actually. It just wasn't what I had planned. And then I am going to add some seed beads to this as well. I feel like beads really make shaker contents move around a lot. So I want to make sure I have a lot there and it's nice and full. I've kind of flattened it out into a big puddle, let's say. And I'm going to make sure it's all in the center. And then I'm pulling off the backer paper from my foam tape that I put down earlier. And then I can flip this over and just lay it right onto my card base. Since all that stuff is in the middle, it's not underneath my foam tape. And now it's all trapped inside. So you can kind of see how that glitter, once I shook it, sort of stuck to the acetate, but it kind of gives it a really cool shimmer effect. And you can still see through all that glitter. So it's not what I intended, but it is a fun mistake. And then finally, I need to add my snowman. I've put some big glue dots on his head because that overlaps onto the acetate, and then some liquid glue on the bottom. And I'm just going to lay him over where that little tree is so that he's in the foreground of my scene. And then this is my finished winter scene shaker card. I love all that glitter and stuff inside. The background was really fun to make. And this would be great even if it wasn't a shaker card. So here is a look at that finished card, and I hope today's video has inspired you to kind of look at your older stamp sets, mix and match those dies, and get inky. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.